Post it to YouTube. Welcome. So this is my little demonstration, really, about setting up an author website. And I organized this meeting as part of Straw Dog Writes, which is our local authors writing group with the Straw Dog Writers Guild. And this will be made available probably via YouTube shortly. And really what this is a demonstration more than it is a set of prescriptive or organized remarks. I'm going to show you how I set up my author's website, and then you can use that however you like to set up a website or not. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is kind of what are the goals here? As an author, some people I think naively believe that if you're an author, you can just like you write a manuscript and then you submit it for publication and then you write the next manuscript. When in fact, if you really want to get your work out in front of people to read, you're going to need to spend a vast amount of time trying to publicize your work, trying to promote your work and put it out where people can discover it. Even if it gets published, you're probably going to find that your publisher doesn't really do much promotion anymore. In the past, they did a lot more, and now increasingly they depend on authors to actually try and build an audience and promote their own work. As part of that, one of the things you probably want to do is just provide information about your writing that's available and information about yourself, something about yourself as an author and about your biography perhaps, and then updates so that people can find out where your work is, what new work you have coming out, where they're able to get it, when it's going to come out. And the goal, again, like I say, is to try and build an audience so that when you have a piece of work coming out, people will pre-order it. And when it shows up in stores, they'll go and buy it. And that's really kind of the critical thing to do. So there are a number of free solutions that people sometimes use. Social media is an obvious one, Facebook, for example. And then there's some platforms. Substack is a big one, and Patreon. The goal is to get people to pay for your stuff and to be a subscriber that way. But what I would like to do is propose the idea of building your own website that's something that you own and control. Largely because the platform sites, especially like Facebook as an example, they're positioned themselves as a middleman between you and your audience. And what they've tried to do is capture your audience from you and then make you pay money so that they will see the things that you're posting. That is, if you want to show them something, you have to pay Facebook. And so they try and conceal anything that you post from your audience unless you pay the money. That's what their business model is. So that's why I would suggest avoiding the free services. And the platforms have similar problems as well. Now let me go ahead and I'm going to show you what I've done, which is to register domain name, use a hosting service, and then I'm using the content management system WordPress to actually build my website. And I'll talk a little bit about each one of these things and why I've chosen to do the ones that I've done. And so let me go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to go to the desktop, I guess. And let me move this out of the way. So I've already logged into my DreamHost panel here. And DreamHost is a website that it's a company that provides website hosting, and they provide a whole bunch of different levels of it. But the most basic, cheapest one is just called shared hosting. And if I just go to the DreamHost website without being logged in, whoops, that's the webmail. I want this dreamhost.com. And you can see that the for hosting, the cheapest one they say is at $2.95 a month. It actually goes up a little bit more and works out being about the one that I'm doing costs $155 a year, and I share that with my brother. It looks a little cheaper than it actually ends up being, but it lets you build a website. It comes with a domain, and it has a WordPress installer so that you can run WordPress on it, that they will then install and support for you. And then there are obviously a lot more expensive options. DreamPress is if you want to have a much bigger, more powerful website. The issue being that if you get one of the shared websites, your website is only going to be able to support a relatively small amount of traffic. And so if you had important information about Michael Jackson, for example, and on the day Michael Jackson died, everybody tried to go to your website, then your website wouldn't work for most of them because it can only support a relatively small number of connections. This was, in fact, the business model of a web company called Prometheus a while ago. They would say, what if Michael Jackson died? Then your website's going to be overwhelmed. I'm sorry, Michael Jackson already died, and I'm never going to have information that's important to anybody. And so I'm not really worried about that. And so just buying the shared basic solution has been enough for me the whole time that I've been using it. Very, very occasionally, when an article comes out, a whole bunch of people go to the website all at once, and some of them don't necessarily get a quick response or it's unavailable for a minute or two, but then it comes back up. And I'm not really worried about that level of response. If you are, then you can obviously pay more per month, or you can also get a VPS. And that's where you have your own isolated service that you can set up. And so there are options. If you became a best-selling author and you needed this model to grow for you, then obviously these are mechanisms that you could do it. But as a beginning author, the very most basic plan, the cheapest plan, is probably good enough. The first thing that you're probably going to want to do is to find a domain name. And if you start with your name, I'm just going to go with VivekMenon.com is unavailable. Maybe Vivek already used that, but there's a whole bunch of other choices that you can have as well, because it used to be that .com was like, that was the only top level domain that people really were aware of. Now it turns out that that doesn't matter so much, although I probably would avoid, if somebody already had the name that I wanted to use, I probably would just pick something different, perhaps something related to the work that I'm doing, or add a middle initial. There's obviously a whole bunch of things that you can do in order to try and find a space where you're going to have a unique name that doesn't collide with other things. I mean, if your name is General Motors, obviously you're going to have trouble because there's, a whole lot of stuff, and all of your stuff is always going to get lost in searches. But your goal is to try and find something that's really relatively unique. And just as an example, I'm just going to pick something that I know probably doesn't have anything conflicting with it. And so the first year is going to be $8.99, but in fact, it probably will be about $20 a year. Between $15 and $20 a year is typical for a domain name if you're buying it by yourself. But like I say, if you're buying the hosting service, it will come with a domain name that's part of the expense. And so you don't really need to worry about what it costs as an individual thing. But you'll see that there are a whole bunch of different top level domains that you could use if you wanted to. I always wanted to get a domain name from Eritrea, which is .er, and then I could have a domain name brew.er as the site, and then I could have stephen.d.brew.dr. But Eritrea won't sell domain names to anybody outside of Eritrea, and so I haven't ever been able to do that. But every year or so I go back and check to see. But in any case, once you've picked out a domain name, then you can use that as your site. And again, the goal is to try and find something that's relatively unique, that isn't going to collide with anything else that already exists on the web, so that you can publicize your work and that people will find it easy to find your stuff and have it be unique and distinctive to you. After you've signed up for DreamHost, you'll register the domain name, and here are the domain names that I have registered. I set up some for my wife years ago when she was doing political campaigning. I did a lot of stuff at bierfaristo.com for a long time, and I still use it for some things. But I set up stephendbrewer.com for my author work, and in general, it renews itself every year. I would set it up to automatically renew. It's a really good idea just so that you don't forget. If you forget and it becomes unavailable, then you're going to have to rush and try and make it work again. And it just speaking from experience, unless you're thoughtful, it's easy to just forget that it happens. Since if you only have one domain name and it's included in the hosting service, it's easy to set it to auto renew because it's just going to be part of the overall service anyway. And that's about all there is to say about domain names. I'll talk about domain names once more just shortly. But then once you've got a domain name set up, you can manage websites, and you can create a website. And you can have a whole bunch of subdomains as well. So for bierfaristo.com, for example, I have blog.bierfaristo.com, draco.bierfaristo.com, libre.bierfaristo.com. So I'd set up a whole bunch of different websites at various times over the years. But for stephendbrewer.com, all I have is stephendbrewer.com as my website. It's set up to be shared, and you can change the level of PHP that it uses. I've set up just one email address, I think, which is the one that you probably get stuff from, sdbrewer@stephendbrewer.com. And I haven't used WordPress to install the website that I have. And one thing that I did under DNS settings was I added a TXT record for the app proto, which means that if I go to Blue Sky, oh, it's actually bSky, isn't it? bSky is a social media system, and you see that I've got my domain name as my username at Blue Sky. And so that's how you do verified links there, so that I can show that this is actually me, that this isn't somebody who's pretending to be me, which if you've been on the internet ever before, you discover happens reasonably often, that on Facebook, there are people that are constantly setting up Facebook profiles that pretend to be an actual person, and they try and siphon off some of the people that know you and run scams pretending to be you. So in any case, that's one of the things that you can do with if you have a domain name, if you're using the social media system Blue Sky. Let me go back to manage websites again. I'm not used to using the new version of the panel at DreamHost. They had it all set up differently, and now it's set up different. But you can go through here and you can find the different options that are available. I don't think I've changed any of this stuff. All I did was install WordPress. So under WordPress, I think you can just install WordPress and then it runs without you needing to really do anything. But like I say, DreamHost has the other options for WordPress that are available. And so if you're not careful, you can accidentally sign up for the more advanced WordPress service. So it's worth being a little cautious when you get it set up. Once you have WordPress installed and you've got your domain name, it may take a day or two, but eventually then, the reason that it takes a while is that when you create a domain name, it has to propagate out through the internet. All of the different domain servers in the world have to learn about the domain name and where it points. And so once it gets set up, then you should have a basic WordPress site set up that you can begin to configure. And you may have seen my WordPress site before. Let me make the text just a little bit bigger. But this is obviously after I've configured it. Before you actually start setting stuff up, it's worth taking a few minutes and beginning to think about kind of what your content strategy is, what the information is that you want to try and share, and how do you want to have that information organized. So as I mentioned about an author, one of the things that you want to do is you want to have information about yourself. And you might want to have a biography. And obviously I've got books that I want to sell, and so I want to list those someplace. And I'd like to have a way for people to be able to contact me. And so these are what I call pages, which is there's static information that I can go and update periodically to have the current accurate information about myself. Or in the case of contact me, I actually have a little form that people can fill out. And so it lists my email, but then people can also fill out a form and just send me a message within here. As it turns out, almost every message I've ever gotten this way is spam, but it's a contact form that's available. And who knows, maybe sometime, there'll be a press release about me. And so a whole bunch of people want to ask me questions, and maybe I'll get some useful information that way. But in any case, it's one of the things, a role that you probably want your website to serve for you. Some information right up top so that people know who I am, that they can just look instantly and see what the website is about. And then also, I wanted to have something that would link the different social media things that I use. And so I do most of my stuff on Mastodon. I have a presence at Facebook. I do have an Instagram set up, although I basically never use it. A website also offers the opportunity for people to use a service called RSS, so that they can subscribe to your website and get automatic updates anytime anything is posted. RSS was a really big thing about maybe 10 years ago. And Google set up a system called Google Reader, and it became relatively popular. I believe that RSS was kind of the wave of the future, and that everybody would be using an RSS reader just like everybody was using email. But Google decided that it wasn't in their business interests to support RSS. And so they took down Google Reader and basically worked hard to de-emphasize RSS everywhere on the internet. All the big content providers did. And so RSS still exists and you can still use it, but it's not something that most people know about. Instead, almost everybody has gone back to using a newsletter. And I've set up a mechanism for people to have a newsletter so that people can subscribe. And then articles that I post at my blog every month, I can mark a certain number of articles to be included in a newsletter that gets sent out to people that subscribe to the newsletter. And unfortunately, although as much as I hate it, that probably is the best way to build an audience, is ultimately to have an email newsletter and get people to subscribe to it. And so the website, in a certain sense, is kind of a lost leader for that purpose. That is, it's work that I put in where I collect all of the writing that I do and I organize it, and I have a graphical representation of it that people can discover. But what I really want is people to subscribe to my newsletter. And then beyond that, beyond the information that is kind of static, I want to have a series of updates. And so that's what the blog is for, is that there are articles that show up here. And so when I got my final schedule for my presentations at Aresia, I was able to post them here. And then people that are monitoring my blog, or I can link to this on social media, then can discover what it is that I'm doing at different conferences. And I can also write just opinion pieces, articles, and talk about what my year in writing was, all the different things I did the last year. So in any case, this is an opportunity then for me to introduce the work that I'm doing and talk about writing in general on the website. So those are the kinds of information that I have. So when you start up with DreamHost, what you're going to have is a dashboard. And the dashboard basically provides an overview of the stuff that's on the site. I haven't done much to configure my dashboard, but one thing that it does is it has kind of an at a glance to show you some numbers about where you're at. Right now, I've got 6 comments in my spam queue. It shows me some of the recently published articles. There's a site health status. And so I can check and see if everything is configured correctly on my website, or if there's anything that's missing or that I should do. I have a few inactive plugins that I'm not using right now. I could remove those if I want to. I have some inactive themes that I'm using. I could remove those if I want to. I don't want to connect my website to the Google Search Console, so I don't need to worry about that. So my site's health is good. But if you actually had problems, then it would show you, it does all these different checks and lets you know if there are various problems, things that you need to deal with. And some of these are can be confusing. And so if you needed support, you might want to go find a user group or something like that if you were having problems with them. But they basically all are working unless there's some relatively serious problem going on. And so now let's talk a little bit about the structure of the site. The first thing that you probably need to do is to choose a theme. And here. So I have 5 themes installed, but there are actually a vast, and those are the ones that mostly came with my website. I actually think I've removed a few. When you set it up at DreamHost, they have a variety of themes that are available. And I chose this one, which is called Creo. And I chose it because it had the features that I was looking for. That is, it had a big block at the top, and it had a list for the social media links, and it had a menu of static pages, and then it provided updates. And you can see that there are themes that have very different kinds of looks. These are just the ones that I have installed here. I didn't like the look of them as much, and so I didn't use them. But in fact, there's a vast number of other themes, 7,217, that you could look through, try and find some other theme that matches your aesthetic and has the features that you're looking for. There was one that I looked at the other day when I was kind of scrolling through here that I kind of liked. This Newsmatic, that I thought that might be kind of cool for the sorts of things that I'm doing. And that once again, it has the little, it has the social media links up here. It has a thing that crawls, but you can probably stop that. I can't have unrequested motion on pages. And so things like this that bounce around are anathema to me. Something that changes like this, I can't have. But there's a whole bunch of different themes that you can look through and pick from. And in fact, you can actually try them out. So it might be worth installing a little bit of the content that you're going to have on your site, and then looking to see what happens when you actually populate it, to see whether or not you like the way it looks. But again, I chose the site that I did because it matched the information structure that I had in place. So the dashboard, again, once you've chosen the theme, then you can begin customizing the theme. And so there's a pointy clicky thing here that lets you go through and edit all of the different components of it in order to change the layout of things. So it's worth pointing out that you've got different regions and you can install things in those different regions. So this is the header region, and it has the title and basic information in it. This is where it has the social links on this particular website. This is the top menu. And then this is the body part of the page. And then there's this sidebar over here that has other different things that you can put in there. And the things that you put in different regions of the website are called widgets. And so here are the different widgets that I've installed in the sidebar. And so the sidebar shows up, and I have it set up to show up on every single page. And so I've got this custom HTML block that has a little form for my newsletter in it. It has a block that gets installed from a plugin that I have that lets me show some of my most recent posts at a social media site. It shows my most recent comments. It shows my most recent posts. I have archives set up so that I can go back and drill down from old posts that I made. And then I tag all of my posts using categories. And so if somebody wants to look at all of the articles that I've written about fiction or about the internet or about any particular book or book project, they can click on that and see just those articles installed. And I've got that block set up here in the sidebar so that people can find it. But with this, you can then have kind of a top-down view, customize a whole bunch of different aspects of the way the theme is presented. And you can change the sizes of text. You can make things bigger or smaller, depending on what your particular aesthetic is. A bunch of the general settings are just under settings general. And so this is where we've got the site title. And so you saw that right at the beginning of the page. And then this is the tagline, the basic information that goes there. It's worth setting up a site icon. You don't necessarily see this. It doesn't seem necessarily all that important, but it provides a graphic identity for your site so that if somebody bookmarks your site, that it has an icon associated with it that is distinctive. You need to have an administration email address so that information purposes show up. I would not set it up so that anyone can register your website. I wouldn't let anybody else modify your website unless you specifically ask somebody. And if you want, you could ask 2 or 3 people that you want to help you post stuff or to help you vet articles so that you can write articles as a draft, and then you can ask somebody to come and look at your article and see if there are mistakes or problems or things like that. The time zone. I have a module that will associate my Mastodon profile with this site so that if I go to Mastodon, and let me just do that really quick. The instance that I use for Mastodon is called wandering.shop. And if I go to my profile here, you can see that my website is verified. It's green and it's got this little check mark. And that just means that, again, that somebody who's visiting the social media profile can have confidence that I am actually this person that's associated with this website. So again, making it difficult to impersonate me on the internet. What are some other ones? One thing that I've found useful is if you create a post, I'm going to just go to create a new post. There are several different kinds of editors that you can use to create the post, and you can control which editor you're using. In my case, using the, where is it? This post and page builder. And so there's the WordPress editor, but there are several other editors. The post and page builder is the modern one that people like, and I've heard people that just really love it. I hate it. I'm kind of old style, and so I'm using the oldest one that's available, which is the WordPress editor. There's also the classic editor that may look more familiar to some people, but you're welcome to try out different editors and see which one you find most familiar. But in my case, to create new content, these are all different kinds of content that I can create. As I mentioned, you have just a handful of pages. So, I had about me and books, for example. These are the pages that I've got. And so I can create a new page by going to this link. If you want to create a new, basically, news article, one that's going to show up in the blog, then that would be creating a post. And basically, you have a title, and then as you go down here, you can choose different blocks. If I just start writing, I can just start putting content in. I'm going to generally leave that one blank for just a minute. And then here is the body. Here is another paragraph. And then if I type a slash, it gives me a bunch of different kinds of blocks that I can insert. And the main one that I probably would want to do is under the title, I'm going to always want to put an image. You probably always want to have an image associated with one of your posts. And the reason is that if you want to promote your post on social media, posts that have an image associated with them tend to be a lot more attractive to people. And so when you add an image, you can either select one from the media library. Some themes come with stock photos in them. I wouldn't generally use those. I would use my own photos or imagery. You can also get images, obviously, from Creative Commons licensed things. If you look at either Flickr or Google, you can find images that are licensed for you to be able to use them. You don't want to use somebody else's imagery. In general, I use mostly my own imagery. And so I've got a bunch that's already uploaded in the media library. Here's the cover of my book, for example, one of my books. Here's a picture of me. Here's a picture of a dog for some reason. These are all images that I've used to support posts at various times in the past. But then I have a library of cool pictures that I took for a book project that I did years ago. I've got teeth. There's this weird timer. Here's a book. Here's a pocket watch. Here's a spider. Actually, it's a robotic spider toy. Here's a necklace of a Tibetan Buddhist rosary. So I can pick out whatever image I want to support my particular post. And it comes in and it's going to take up the width of the whole page, but I can set it to say align to the left and then move it over, and then it will be wrapped into the body of the text that I'm working on. It's a good idea to save your draft periodically. It saves drafts automatically without you needing to do anything. And then there's a bunch of settings over here that you might need to use at various times. I'm not going to go into them in a great amount of detail. I have a plugin installed that does search engine optimization. I don't really like to use it all that much, but it gives you some clues. It shows you a little preview of what your thing is going to look like if you post it out somewhere on the internet. I can pick out which categories I want to use. Anytime you've created a post, it's going to show up in the all posts list. And so these are all of the posts that I've written. I've got 9 pages of them. And so, for example, I've written a post about the presentation that I'm doing today. And if I click edit, I can show you one that's a little bit more fleshed out. And so here's a post that I've got that's all ready to go. And it's basically more or less the same information that I'm presenting to you today. Pages are exactly the same. I would approach them basically the same. If we go to pages, here are the pages that I have set up. And so we can just take a look at the About Me page. And so in this case, I put the image over here on the right instead of on the left. And then it's information that has a bunch of links to various things about me. So if anybody wants to get a thumbnail overview of me, this is the biography that I've used associated with books that I've published. And then here's my list of books. And this is just a little clunky because all it is the titles. I probably should turn this into a gallery, and that's on my list of things to do. You're always going to have a whole list of things that you wish that you'd gotten done better, and that you say, one of these days I'll actually get around to fixing all this stuff and making it better. But it's always going to be a work in progress. You're always going to be, getting something set up that's good enough and then letting it be good enough. And then at some point you can go in and make it better, unless you hire some professional that can come in and fix all these things for you. But not very many of us can afford to do that. And then the last thing I was going to talk about very briefly is the way that I use microblog. So micro.blog is a website that you can set it up as a blog, and you can actually get a domain name of your own to point at it if you want to and run it that way. And so it's a much stripped down version of WordPress. It can't do nearly as many of the things that WordPress can do, but I'm not trying to use it that way. Instead, what I was kind of interested in was a way of having something that could take the things that I was writing and then post them to social media for me automatically. In point of fact, I've ended up not using it for that. And instead, all I'm using it for these days is for my newsletter. And so I already showed you the little subscription field that I use. But every month, um, articles that I post on my website get brought in here because I've got a source listed. And so here are the different articles that I've written. And I can tag them and say, include this in a newsletter. And then on the first of the month, early in the morning, it gives me about a half hour if I want to make any changes. And then it sends it out to my subscribers. And so that's the main thing that I'm using it for. Let's see. And so here's where I've got the feed, the RSS feed, as it turns out, for my website that gets brought in here to this. But then down here is where I can configure it to cross post. So it can take things that I have posted here, and then it can post them to any of these different things for me automatically. In point of fact, I write all that stuff by hand because I'd rather handwrite something. If I were more careful about the way I wrote posts, I probably could write posts that would automatically post nicely in other services. But I would rather do that manually myself rather than having it always show up. But it's one of the things that you can do with micro.blog. And so between the two things, between the hosting service that I share with my brother and micro.blog, my total outlay for web hosting is about $200 a year. That is, I think it's $155 for the hosting service, and which I split with my brother, and then micro.blog is $10 a month. And so it comes out to about $200 a year, which is sustainable for me in terms of promoting my author activities. But there are obviously, cheaper ways that you can do all these things. You don't have to do the micro.blog thing. And in fact, DreamHost, you can set up DreamHost to manage distribution lists for you, which is what the newsletter that I'm doing here is. But it was a little easier to do it with micro.blog, and I was already using micro.blog. So that was why I set it up that way. And so that's kind of it that I have for my organized remarks. I don't think I've forgotten anything. But does anybody have questions? Anything that you'd like me to talk about in more detail or go into? Yeah, I see Vivek pointed out in the comments that the free companies make it hard for you to take your audience elsewhere. That's exactly right. That's their goal, is to try and lock people into their particular business model. And when I bring up the article for there's a guy called The Oatmeal who does a kind of a funny web comic. And so I just put a link in the chat for a comic that he wrote about his experience trying to use Facebook, which is, you set up your own little amateurish site, and then Facebook says, oh, why don't you have all your people come over here and do all that stuff in Facebook? And then they lock up all your stuff so that people don't see your stuff unless you pay them money. I mean, it really is a scam.
Yeah. And not only that, is the most of the time the money is just designed to generate more clicks from audiences into Facebook. It's
Right.
even harder to get them to see how your money is going to get them out of Facebook to your website. They just make it so tricky to measure and pay.
Last year, I did an experiment just to do some advertising at Facebook to see how effective it might be. And what I did is I spent $14 a week for about, I don't know, 10 weeks or something like that. $14 a week was amount that I thought was kind of sustainable to see how valid it was. And I couldn't see that I actually got any sales. They would report that there were clicks, that is, people would click through to the site that I was pointing them at, but I couldn't see any correlation with people actually buying anything. And so I quit doing that. I also spent a while trying to I took a little course in doing advertising at Amazon. And I also didn't have any luck with the Amazon advertising. It's extremely complicated to do the advertising at Amazon in particular. Facebook makes advertising at least easy, but it's not particularly effective. And as Amazon, it's really complicated. and it's also not very effective. In particular, part of the reason that it's not effective for me was that the courses are really aimed at if you're the owner of the things that you have posted at Amazon, so that you can tweak various aspects of their presentation. But all of my stuff is through a publisher, almost all of it, and
Mm.
so I couldn't change any of those things. Bluehost. I chose DreamHost in 2007, so I've been using it for a really long time. There are a whole bunch of different hosting services. I'm presenting DreamHost just because that's the one that I've used for a long time. I've been very happy with them. In particular, anytime I've had a technical problem of any sort, I've contacted them and I've gotten a very prompt reply from somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. I've worked with other hosting services where you'd have to go through like 2 or 3 different tiers of idiots asking you stupid things. Like, is it plugged in? It's like, yes, I know it's plugged in. Come on. That's the main reason that I've stuck with DreamHost. It's not perfect, and I've had minor problems with DreamHost in the past. But as I say, when I've had problems, they've been very responsive at fixing them. Um, and so yeah, which is the best hosting service to use nowadays? I have no idea. Media Temple is one that people used to like a whole lot. I used to use one called Hypermart that they were terrible.
Mm.
What was the other one that people used? I don't remember. Yeah, there's a zillion different hosting services.
And so, Stephen, you picked deliberately these services like DreamHost over like a Squarespace or a Wix or some of these other ones, because with those you can build sites and they look great and everything. But from my understanding, if you want to then take it and go somewhere else, it's really hard. You basically have to rebuild everything from scratch.
Exactly. And that's part of why I wanted to use WordPress, is that WordPress is something that you can host a vast number of different places. And it's relatively easy to take all of your DreamHost or your WordPress content and either migrate it to a different WordPress site, or to just take your existing site, bundle it up, and take it to a different hosting service. The same way with your domain name. Your domain name is registered with DreamHost in this case, but you can transfer it to a different hosting
Hmm.
service. You can even just point it at a different hosting service, or you could migrate it to a different registrar.
Mhm.
And it used to be that I had one company that I did my domain name registrations with, and then I would simply, at that, point it to the hosting service that I was using. It's convenient to do it all in DreamHost, and I like the tools that they have reasonably well. Well, I did before they updated their panel. I haven't used the new panel enough to be comfortable with it yet, but the old panel was a little clunky, but at least I knew where everything was. The new one maybe looks nicer, and I'm sure the functionality is just there. It's just unfamiliar to me. They, when I logged in to get ready for this presentation, I was still using the old panel. And then, like 2 days ago, I logged in and they updated the panel. And I think I saw a link someplace that I could make them show me the old panel again, which might have been a little bit more convenient for me. But I left it this way so that you could at least see what the new panel looks like, um, rather than, and fumbling around a little bit more. It's never a bad thing to show people that I fumble around too. Don't assume that because I've done all this stuff that somehow I'm some super magical genius or anything. I figured out the same way that anybody else figures it about, by fumbling around with it until I figure out how to make it work.
That's a great point. With a lot of this stuff, it keeps changing. There's always new options. It's good to have that mindset of let me just go in and tinker it and be very free with clicking the help button or going to Google and then going back and just
Right.
kind of noodling on it yourself. So,
Yep. Many years ago, when I was in graduate school, actually, my dad would joke that he thought there should be a 10-year moratorium on technological change to give everyone the chance to catch up, he said. Oh, that's so funny. Ha, ha, ha. And then a few years ago, I was thinking, wow, that actually sounds like a pretty good idea. And then I realized I was exactly the same age that he was when he was saying that years ago. Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Have you heard of a software builder, website builder named Coffee Cup Software?
I haven't, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I
And
mean, there are a whole bunch of ways that you can build websites. One way the one way that I have built websites in the past is something called Bootstrap. which you actually have to write the code, but almost all of the code is abstracted away. And so what you're writing really are very, very simple pages, and then it simply loads in all the complexity from these other the libraries of code that it has in the background. And again, there's big advantages to having a static website that doesn't have a content management engine running under it, in that those things are stable and they will last a really long time without you needing to worry about the software underneath them. I wanted to
Say
use
that again.
Pardon?
Say that again.
Oh,
There's advantages to.
So I'll show you my wife's campaign website.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just
No, it's totally fine. So this is a static website that I created for my wife. What was it, 6 years ago or something like that, when she was running for town council in the town of Amherst. And it has, 3 different little pictures that it shows up here. And then it has 3 different sections that you can go to and you can click on details. And it has these different sections that you can look at. So this is a static website, meaning that there's no complex piece of software that's running under this. It's just one static page that has all this content in it, but the page is relatively simple, and it doesn't have a lot of it doesn't have a lot of complexity, but it doesn't change. There's nothing that's running here. It just exists the way it is. WordPress, on the other hand, has a whole bunch of really complicated code with a configuration system, and you do all of the management of it online. But there are updates that come out almost constantly. Every week or two, different parts of the code need to be updated. And in general, I just click the thing and they get updated automatically, and it's not a big deal. But under some circumstances, those things can produce security problems. That's actually why I tell you not to let other people edit stuff on your website, is because that's where most of the security problems actually come from. As long as you're just looking at the site, you're relatively safe. But there are advantages to building a website that's static, that doesn't have anything that changes about it, but it makes it much harder to update and to provide like a feed of information, that's probably what you want to do, is you want to be constantly posting updates to it. And so that's one of the things that WordPress makes very easy, is to be able to have something that's, a lot more like a blog.
Mm-hmm.
WordPress is the underlying software you were talking about,
Yes,
right?
WordPress is the server software that produces this site. I didn't talk about plugins. I should talk about plugins just very briefly. So plugins add functionality to your website. One of the ones that I actually pay for, the only one that I pay for, is Akismet, which does spam protection. And so if people post comments on your website, and if you let people post comments, you'll get spam comments. Right now, I think it said that there were 6 spam comments. Let's go look at those really quick, just for funsies. So I have 0 pending comments. Everything has to be approved by you before it actually shows up. But Akismet recognizes things that it thinks are spam and moves it off into spam. And so I can look just very briefly every so often and see what there is. But here you can see these are what spam comments look like. People post stuff, a machine posts stuff that makes it look like they're saying something about what you wrote. But in fact, it's all about just trying to get you to put spam on your website. They would love to be able to have their websites get your Google juice. That is, the way Google decides if something is worth showing people is largely about what links to it. And so if they can get a whole bunch of people to link to their site by putting in these spam links on other people's websites, then it makes their site more prominent on the internet. So in any case, that's a plugin that I actually pay for, so that I don't have to spend time looking at the spam very often. I can just delete almost all of it because it's all filtered off to the side. Some got installed automatically along with my website. The all-in-one SEO is one that I'd mentioned before. The bold grid gallery that got installed as part of the automatic install that came along with my theme that was provided by DreamHost. This include Mastodon feed. That's what puts the little block with that says at Stephen Brewer at wandering.shop. And then here are some of my most recent posts via social media. And I can configure the number of posts that show up here in the sidebar. But the thing that makes that work is this little plugin, include Mastodon feed. The independent analytics is kind of cool. It provides analytics. It provides this that shows me an overview of how many people have visited the site, the number of sessions, and I can also look at refers to see where content is coming, where clicks are coming from. Mostly direct, but if you're coming from Blue Sky, if you're coming from Google, some are coming from Facebook, some are coming from SIFWA, and so on. So that's another plugin that I've installed. The simple Mastodon verification, that inserts a tiny snippet of HTML in my website so that, as I showed you when I go to the Mastodon, my Mastodon profile, my website shows up as verified. The super cache is worth mentioning. The super cache, basically what it does, when I look at a page when I'm logged in, a whole bunch of code has to run on the server to generate the page that it shows me. And that page is absolutely perfectly up to date right to the second. On the other hand, if John Rando goes to my website, so over here, for example, if I click stephendbrewer.com, not being logged in, like just a random person on the internet visiting my website, the page comes up super fast. And the reason is that the caching system has preserved a rendered version of the page and can just send them that rendered version of the page. It might not be quite up to date. It might be 5 minutes old or 10 minutes old or 15 minutes old, but it's generally recent enough, and they can provide it really, really fast. And it's one of the things actually that helps a lot if a whole bunch of people all descend on your site at once, that it's not having to generate from scratch a web page for them. Instead, it can just show them ones that was pre-generated. Let's see, are there any other ones? Oh, WP Forms Lite. I showed you the little contact form that I use. The Lite version of it will only send you contact information results as an email. So I get emails that have whatever it is that people put in that thing. Most of them are spam, like I said. But that way you can have a form that is easy and free to put in. If I paid the money, I could have more complicated forms and forms that would preserve the information on the website and potentially use the information on the website. One of the things that a different content management system I used in the past called Drupal was much more focused on just having usable stuff. WordPress has focused much more on having a market. And so a whole bunch of the add-ons for it are commercial. And what you end up using is kind of nagware. This little red thing here is a notification from the search engine optimization system that's trying to get me to buy the pro version all the time. And I don't want to buy the pro version. I just want to have it. I'm happy to have it be useful as it is, but I'm not really that worried about upgrading it because I'm not that concerned about search engine optimization. But yeah, there's a zillion different ways that you can build websites. But like I say, one of the things that's kind of nice about WordPress is that it does provide things like comments. You probably can't have a system for people to provide comments if you're using a static website. You probably can't get an RSS feed very easily if you're using a static website. You probably can't have a block that has other information in it without, that's pre-generated. You might be able to have some JavaScript things that would go off and grab stuff, but I think that WordPress, it's the the best way that I'm aware of to provide this sort of personal blog system.
Mhm.
Before I knew anything, this was probably 15 years ago, I did a couple websites, static websites, and GoDaddy was my host. It was very expensive. Do you know anything? Is it just too expensive? It's the same thing as DreamHost, it seems.
Like I say, there's a whole bunch of different hosting services. GoDaddy was mostly did domain name registration, but they saw it being lucrative enough for people that didn't want to have a separate hosting service that they started providing hosting service as well. But yeah, I always thought they were relatively expensive. And to be honest, all I had to do was to look at one of their ads because they had these ads with scantily clad women in them that were objectifying and offensive to me. I was like,
Yeah.
no, not going to have anything to do with that company ever under any circumstances.
Yeah, that's how I got involved. I had my domain domains registered through them, and the one I still have currently is registered with them.
Yep, you can transfer it. It's
Yep.
tricky to do the transfer, but you can transfer it anywhere you want.
I had talked to you about it because I went on and saw that I could transfer, and I think I had a question, you answered it, but I don't want to do that till I know what I want to do. I know
Right.
I don't want to be on GoDaddy. I'm going to transfer it eventually, but I don't know where.
And Phyllis, I looked up Coffee Cup while we were chatting, and it looks like it's a cool tool to design websites
Yeah, I
without too
used it.
much coding. Or
I used it
yeah,
to do two websites, which I've taken down now because I did
yeah,
two short films, and each film had its own static website. But
yeah,
yeah, I had fun, but I had to code. You
yeah,
really have to know the code. You have
Yep.
to
yeah,
code a little.
yeah. Like you'd need CSS or HTML or something. And the other thing, to your point, Stephen, is
He
super
froze.
helpful to have. And yeah, DreamHost and others provide it.
You froze there for a minute, so we missed some of the words that you said. You want to repeat what you said?
Oh, sorry. I was just repeating what you had said earlier. The content management side that you can get through a DreamHost or a Bluehost is super helpful because it's a living, living asset. So that would be very hard to do with a static website service.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to code. You can. I mean, there are certain things where I go through and I write code because I've been writing HTML code for years and years and years and years and years, longer than I would like to admit. But you don't have to. It's you can do all of it with a pointy clicky sort of interface. Anything else? Any other questions? All right.
This
Well,
is
yeah.
really helpful.
Oh,
Really
good.
helpful.
Well, thank you very much for coming. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording.